I'm Kavya Agarwal, a 2022 graduate of Jindal Global Law School. I did my master's from King's College London under the specialized Jindal Pathway program. And currently I'm working as a law clerk cum research associate with the Honorable Justice Mr. Manoj Mishra at the Supreme Court of India. And I feel elated to welcome you all to the launch of Center for Legal Empowerment of the Poor, a joint initiative of Jindal School of Government and Public Policy and Jindal Global Law School. Till date, many efforts have been put into finding the most appropriate approach to poverty reduction. And time and again, we have landed on the economic approach. But the interplay between law and poverty is intricate, and yet the significance of legal systems in poverty alleviation have not gained sufficient focus. We fail to realize that almost all impoverished communities lack equitable access to government institutions and services that safeguard and promote human rights. They are frequently unable to expressively affect their demands, seek redress for injustice, engage in public life, or influence policies that will eventually affect their lives. People excluded in this manner not only lack legal protection and rights, but any resources they may have cannot be adequately protected or exploited owing to the cumulative consequences of exclusion and discrimination. Obstructions to justice reinforce poverty and marginalization, and thus poverty can be viewed as both a cause and result of exclusion from the rule of law. In the words of United Nations, legal empowerment of the poor can be understood as the process of systemic change through which the poor are protected and enabled to use the law to advance their rights and their interests as citizens and economic actors. Thus, the Center for Legal Empowerment of the Poor stems from the realization that poverty is caused by human action and inaction, and therefore it is conscious human action that can undo it. The seed for this initiative was sown during a conversation between Professor Naresh Singh and me, where we wanted to translate our elective legal empowerment of the poor into a ground-based reality. It was nurtured and brought to life with the help of Professor Ajay, Panday, Professor Pratik, Phadkule, and our colleague Abhirami. And here we are today. J.K. Rowling said, "We do not need magic to change the world. We carry all the power we need inside ourselves already. We have the power to imagine better. So let's imagine better and do better." Thank you everyone for being here today. With that, I would like to invite Professor R. Sudarshan, Dean, Jindal School of Government and Public Policy, to address the gathering.
Thank you very much. It's a real honor for me to be here at the inaugural gathering of the Center for Legal Empowerment of the Poor. Mr. Naresh Singh has been visiting our campus since 2003. I was wondering why it is 30. I wondered why it took so long to set up the center. It's happened. It happens at night time in some way. For me, this is very important personally because I was working in the Ford Foundation and I left the Ford Foundation to join the UNDP when the first human development was established. Because until then, I just didn't know what this institution across the art where I was working was doing. So when this report came out, I just had to sit down. The concept and decided that I will attempt to join the UNDP, and so that's the Ford Foundation that came up. With UNDP, called me a senior economist, was that title, and that's because of the sort of path-breaking conceptual powerful idea that we must be concerned about the well-being of people and so much about how well the economies are doing. There are two lines in that report which I remember. One is a quote from Immanuel Kant, said that treat human beings as ends in themselves, never as means only. Again, there's Aristotle, the first chapter, said that wealth is not the thing we seek. We seek it for the sake of something else. Right? So these two ideas elaborated there. So I mentioned this because I joined UNDP and I worked with Ministry of Finance, Dr. Mohan Ajay, we did abroad on a project that we thought had to, there was all this talk about World Bank, structural adjustment, and so on. And so we thought we needed a project of legal adjustments and reforms, and I managed to persuade the regional officer with the program to give $1 million. So it's a large project, started. And then I persuaded Vivek Deroy, who was then teaching in the Berkeley Institute in Pune, to come and be the coordinator of this project. Neither Vivek or I were lawyers, but we were interested in the subject. And so we then had to populate the acronym we had already thought of, which is large. So we said this project would be called Legal Adjustments and Reforms for a Globalizing Economy. So the work was interested in that in the Delhi office. We produced a number of policy papers. I can't find any of them now. I don't know what happens. Highlight publishers wrote them out. The government of India, of course, accepted it. Politely, Kavya Agarwal shook hands and said very good work, but did nothing at all about any other set of recommendations. And it was done. We made a number of recommendations, some of which have been done now, but some were done a little later, like scrapping the Urban Sealing Act. We found that the Urban Sealing Act had no use, no land had been taken as surplus and put to any public purpose. And the only purpose of the act was that the minister would grant an exemption to the provisions of the act, and therefore big companies that owned Infosys, incidentally, should be described as a landlord, as a real estate company, more than software. That's the amount of land it has in Bangalore and Mysore. So this was the exemption to be given to companies like that for exceeding the land ceiling, for of course some contributions to the political party concerned. So that got scrapped. So I'm leading up to something because after that I went to work in other places and but in 2005 I just finished working, setting up a center on governance for UNDP along with South African lawyer Chaudhary in Oslo. It's called the Oslo Governance Center. Then moved to the Bangkok office. I mean, what brought me back to the Asia region was the tsunami. And so these officers were previously were calling me to come back and help Ajay reconstruct land records and so on using the university students because everything had been wiped out. So that's how in 2005 I was in the Bangkok office when Naresh, who might know Naresh, of course, he was a BDP, one of the first people I think who could lay claim to using the word sustainable in a very meaningful way because he created a program in the Bureau of Development Policy called Sustainable Livelihoods Program. So he announced that UNDP announced that there was this Commission on Legal Empowerment of the Poor To me, this was wonderful because I've been interested in legal reforms, as I mentioned earlier. And so I, greatly followed the work of this commission, got in touch with Naresh. In fact, at one point, persuaded Vivek Agarwal to go and help him. But Vivek, being the kind of person he is, very, I suppose, goes with extraordinarily talented people, some idiosyncratic behavior. He got annoyed with one of the commissioners. He was a very dynamic, charismatic woman who was the minister in the government in Norway, who later became the deputy chief of UN Women, so he quit, and so I felt guilty that he stay long enough to finish work and immediately had to final chapter of this report. So I went along and worked for some time with Naresh and his direction in New York. And then, since I was in the regional office, we had to, try and propagate the report, from country offices, tell them to take this report seriously, do something about it, and so on, which we did. Workshop in Bangkok, and another one in Hanoi, and places like that. But that's some of what as we did some good recommendations. But I must say though, as with the Human Development Report, so also with this report, the UNDP itself hasn't really taken its own recommendations seriously. To this day, UNDP allocates the very modest resources it has on the basis of per capita GDP. Why? Because China would get some, not that it matters about the China now that UNDP and its resources are peanuts, but from the point of view of the Chinese, every little bit counts. Why should we not have extra $10,000 if it's coming our way? So they never allowed UNDP's board to change the criterion for allocating its support in terms of whatever they mobilize on the basis of the Human Development Index. In which case, of course, India doing poorly on the Human Development Index will get a larger budget, and China will get none at all because it's in the high human development category. So it didn't take that out. As for legal empowerment, it's had some kind of, in the initial phases, when Naresh was still there, there was enthusiasm and excitement and meetings going on, but after that, other things come, the MPGs, SPGs, whatever, these international institutions take up the fashion of the day, get excited for some time, and then move on to other things. But this is an important agenda, and I'm very, very happy that this university has established a center, because it's only in the world of civil society that we can expect progress to be made with the recommendations. And putting pressure on government, of course, those laws do need to be changed. And it's nice for the poor to have the law on their side, at least as a law, even if in practice and reality there may be a big gulf. They may not get the protection of the law, which is the point that the report makes very emphatically, that you may have good protection of the laws, but the protection is never equal, and it's only a small segment of society that takes advantage of it. So to correct that situation, we need to do everything possible. It's a very important part of the agenda, because in the end, no matter what kind of regime countries may have, there's something to be said about the rule of law. I mean, I remember reading the great Marxist historian E.P. Thompson. He wrote a wonderful account the Black Act, as it was called in England. That was the enclosures, right, where the big landlords enclosed commons which were accessible to the poor and said, "This is our property, and you are trespassing on this and keeping a deer or a goose out of this land would be punishable with capital punishment." That was what the law was about. So Thompson writes this because in the Marxist view, the rule of law is really the law of the ruler. And so at the end of this account, he has an epilogue, right? After having written this devastating account, showing exactly how the aristocracy in England set up the legal system to favor themselves and exploited the poor people who depended on, as in the case of India, people depend on minor rights produce things that fall to the ground, and they have in a Colombian mentality, Forest Service to this day being harassed for picking up twigs on the forest grounds. It's not something that happened in the enclosure movement. Enclosure on commons is happening here. It's happening in Mongolia, where the great grazing grounds for the Mongolian animals, cattle are being enclosed, privatized, and so on. So this Thompson writes at the end. He says, after all this, he has to say that the rule of law is an unqualified rule. The reason he says that is because the number of procedures that the law has enabled a number of these people who were charged with the offense of trespassing on the land that had been enclosed, were able to get away, were able to save their lives because of some procedural defect in the way in which they had not been told what the charges were very clearly. It was assumed that they had encroached on the wrong land, and there was a misidentification on the part of the authorities who named the territory which they were supposed to have trespassed into was a mistake because this person was far away from there. All of this, safeguards that we can get fed up with legal procedures and say it's all. But Thompson makes the point that this is it. This is saved the people. If there wasn't this, there's only untrammeled autocracy, dictatorship, no accountability of any kind. So at least that the law gives you, and therefore the protection of the law is important. Right? So you get it from a Marxist historian. Then you say, look, it's not something to quibble about. The law is very important, and the protection of the law is very important. So I think therefore we need to, thinking about it make a difference. There are moving the book. The report begins with an account of Madhu Kishwar and her attempt to set up stalls for street vendors. And that's a sorry story because the moment Madhu did it, and she had to appeal to Manmohan Singh and at the highest levels of government to get the Delhi corporation municipality to do it. But having done it, of course, there were local vested interests who didn't want these stalls around. And Madhu had thought of, she thought that if you put up a temple, the place would be sort of safe. So she created a goddess called Chaudhary Devi and encouraging people to keep the place clean. And the broom being the symbol of Yaman. Now, Mother Kishwar thought of it then. But then they were beaten up. And that attempt to provide stalls and some kind of protection to the law for street vendors was difficult. It happened. The same thing with rickshaw pullers, which reference is made. So I think therefore we need to, in many ways, in different contexts India with this agenda. There was a big debate there about whether businesses have rights. I mean, idea that individuals, human beings have rights. I mean, you say business rights, so courts. But the idea really is that businesses are not all big multinational businesses. Ordinary people have businesses or property. We removed property from the fundamental rights chapter in this country and moved it to another provision in the constitution. But we did that because the courts seem to be protecting the zamindars. But then, you should expect that because, policymakers have to necessarily think in terms of more or less. But if you're a lawyer, a judge trained in not in the Indian jurisprudence, but in Western jurisprudence, then the law is, justice is blind. It doesn't matter who the parties are before it. You enforce the law as a law. And that's very antithetical to Indian ideas of jurisprudence. Incidentally, where who the party is matters, in justice. That's another point. But with our Supreme Court, brought up in the Western tradition, everyone has a right to property, whether it's a big zamindar with several square miles or a humble peasant. We all have the right to property, and therefore, right to property implies that you must replace it with some fair equivalent if you take it away. So it's a perfectly understandable ruling on the court, but the government of the day, this has been going on too long and so on, we scrapped it. The consequences, we now realize what the consequences are. It's affecting small people. The fact that they don't have a fundamental right to property, they don't have a direct access to the enforcement of fundamental rights, is affecting small people. It's affecting people like, when the pavement dwellers in Mumbai were shifted, they come with a truck, pull down everything, the tarpaulin, the pots and pans and so on, and put it at the back of the truck and they dump it somewhere. And Justice Sujata Manohar, in a judgment, which later came to the Supreme Court as that as case, she said it's their property. They bought some tires and their property. The Bombay Corporation has no business to take it away without compensating them. Now that's the idea of property. So when we look at these terms, business, property in the report, we have to see that immediately now think of ease of doing business in the World Bank parlance, but think of it in terms of what ordinary people are doing to eat out a livelihood, and how are they to be protected by the law. So I'll end by a quote that I've often used, borrowed it from Naresh, which is that the opposite of poverty is not prosperity, it is justice.
Thank you so much, sir, for those words. Dean S.G. Srijit won't be able to join us today because of some urgent work. I now invite Professor Naresh Singh to deliver the inaugural address.
Thanks very much for Anamita and Sudarshan for coming and helping us start the center. Given us a nice historical introduction to all of this. Where it all started in the UN. He and I worked together on this set of ideas as well as here on the campus. So each of you would have received a little brochure, a 2-page brochure that I have for today. So you have something to take away and reflect on as to what this center is trying to do. But my co-director, colleague, friend, with whom I have had an acquaintance since 2013 as well, when we had a conference here on legal education. Professor Ajay Panday will speak to the actual work that we have planned. We already have planned a work program and how we will engage. We will get into the details. I also want to welcome our first partner, NGO partner, Navjyoti, and their executive director, Mrs. Ujala Chaudhary, is here, and we are already planning an at-once visit to field planning to work together on the ground. And I know there are others who are interested in getting engaged because this has to be a single word. And we learned from 22 national consultations around the world that this process has to be both bottom up and top down. Legal empowerment cannot work at either one of those alone. So what I want to do is to quickly share with you, but of course I must welcome all of you. I just refer especially to my two former students in the course of legal empowerment of the poor who have now joined the Center of Economic Networks, both Kavya and Agarwal. And they will be working with us as well because we hope that we will have activities around the country. So we will see how Agarwal will foster the actions in Mumbai and how Kavya will foster work in Delhi in addition to many other partners that we will begin to spread. And then I should welcome Professor Marx as well. I recall distinctly when I first met him with Arjun Sen Gupta. And, we had a wonderful breakfast at Charles Hotel near the harbor. And I mentioned Sen Gupta because Professor Arjun Sen Gupta was the member from India on the Commission on Legal Empowerment of the Poor. And many of you might know he also chaired the Commission on the Unorganized Sector, groundbreaking work on the informal. You say informal, India has been using the phrase unorganized sector. That work helped to lead to, for example, social security for all, which is on its way in this country, which would be a major achievement one day. But we have had, so the work as you heard started in with this Commission on Legal Empowerment of the Poor. And in this commission, we had some eminent people. I overheard Professor Marx indicating that from the far beyond, Madeleine Albright called upon him to come and participate here today. But Madeleine Albright, the first woman Secretary of State of the United States, was the co-chair. Happy to say that she and I worked closely, and apart from being my immediate boss for this commission, we became very good friends as well as we worked on this. I once said to her, Madeleine, you have very great stature and influence in the world, but you don't know anything about poverty, so that's a problem for this commission, which is on legal empowerment of the poor. So she turns to me and said, so what do you propose to do about it? So I said, why don't we go to Africa and visit a large slum? Here you will, in the slum, having observed, then say a few words on what you have seen and what you think about it. And she agreed. So we went to Kibera together. And the heavy rains came, and if you know Kibera, there are no roads there. There are only muddy lanes. And there was Madeleine with her long boots, walking through the mud and talking to the people, and then finally gave a talk, which got the news and made the rounds and made a big difference. But not aside. I remember a phrase that she used in that little talk she gave. She was also the president of the National Democratic Institute in the US. And she used the phrase, poor people cannot eat democracy. If democracy does not deliver, what's the point of democracy? And one of the ways in which democracy can deliver, we believe, is through the legal empowerment of the poor. So that's a little bit of background. And we had, of course, people like Justice Anthony Kennedy of the US Supreme Court. Some of you might know people in law that he used to be the swing vote. He was neither Republican, although appointed by a Republican government. He was neither so-called Republican or Democrat. They say that the judiciary is separate from the executive or something like that, they used to say. But in the United States, the courts are all politicized. I don't think here the Indian Supreme Court is anywhere near politicized as in the United States. So it's all about Republican or Democrat nominees. Justice Kennedy took a middle path. And I learned a lot by, he would invite me to the US Supreme Court. There I would sit in his chambers and we would talk for hours. So I had some wonderful times in that commission. We had 5 former finance ministers. So a finance minister like Secretary of Treasury, Lawrence Summers. Summers, as many of you might know, former president of Harvard and many other things. Harry called me one day in a corner and said, when I work on the commission, if you put any of that social democratic nonsense that the Swedes are talking about, I am not signing this report. Okay. Deregulation, free markets, and all of that must dominate. So I said, all right, let's see how it goes. And of course, the former Swedish finance minister, Allan Larsson, says to me the opposite. If that nonsense of free economic growth that Larry Summers is talking about gets into this report, I am not signing. So I'm just telling you this so you get a sense of the job I had. So my job was to find a ground, a kind of a middle ground. And of course, I used the influences around me. And Madrid was one of those big influences. In fact, the only person that Larry Summers could really listen to was Madeleine Albright, so that I could get compromise. And as Sudarshan knows well, and others familiar with the UN, the big deal in the UN, the big skill you have in the UN, the most important skill is how to make compromise and how not to end up with the lowest common denominator, which unfortunately is what we end up with a lot of the time. But in this report, I'm happy to say we have more than just the lowest denominator, the lowest common denominator. I might add that one of the things that really made a breakthrough in my mind was a statement made by Arjun Singh one day in the debates. When Arjun said, "Well, this debate is sounding as though human rights and markets cannot work together." I must say that really amazed me and surprised me that he would make this statement. Here is an economist, a well-known economist, literally, I think he was India's representative from the IMF.
But also economic advisor.
Economic advisor to the Prime Minister and so on, and a human rights special rapporteur on rights, I believe, at the same time. And he was he was able to bring these two ideas together and say these two things can work together, human rights and markets. And that was the, sort of one of the critical ideas. And that is how I was able to get people like Larry Summers and people like Allan Larsson of Sweden for the ideas to meld. So all of that happened. I spent many years after reflecting on the work of the Commission. Now I was very proud of the work of the report that we did. I was not very proud of the implementation, as Sudarshan mentioned as well. Now the UNDP is only one agency, but we were hoping that the world will buy it more. It didn't do that, and after 5 years of reflection, 2013, 2012, I decided to write a book on some of the ideas that I was not allowed to put into the report. One of those ideas was that, I had become convinced that if we could not make power a positive sum game, we will not win this fight of legal empowerment of the poor. And that idea came into my mind. One day I was visiting and promoting the work of this commission. I was visiting our director, the Canadian executive director of the World Bank. I was using his office to leverage the World Bank to shift its approach to this work. And that executive director of the bank listened to me and then he said, "But Naresh, have you figured out how you will ever get the elite to give the poor a chance? If the elite will remain dominant and will never give the poor a chance, and it is not in their interest to give the poor a chance, they want to keep poor people poor. That is in their best interest." This guy was a former minister in our government in Canada, now he was executive director of the bank. And I'm listening as he's saying, I did not have an answer. How do we get the elite to give the underprivileged a chance? And I said, I don't have an answer for you, but in a month or two I'll get back. And I have to think about this. And I did think hard about it. And I came to the conclusion that the only way to do this was to make power a positive sum game. The only practical way. That is to say, for you to win, I should not have to lose. But why is it that we think for you to get power, I have to lose power in the same game? Now that requires a lot of work, and I collected examples from grassroots work in Ethiopia and elsewhere. And now my colleagues, I see my colleague Sudeep Batra is here, and Sudeep works on the theoretical side of game theory and so on. And he and I are hoping to do some academic work on making power a positive sum game as well. I think that is key to the legal empowerment of the poor. Otherwise, it's romantic. It becomes romantic nonsense that you are going to just say nice words, and a plantation owner is going to raise the salary of the agricultural workers just because he's a good, great guy. It's not going to do that, right? Unless we can show him that raising the salaries of the agricultural workers on this plantation can be some way in his better interest. I don't know about the better angels of our nature. Yeah. These Harvard scholars, these guys, Stephen. It must be Stephen's good buddy. Yeah. All right, so let me just share a few more thoughts, and then I'll turn it over to my colleague and co-director Ajay. One of the points that I've come to realize is that legal empowerment and legal reform are not the same things. While legal reform is critically necessary for the success of legal empowerment has the word power in the middle. That for me became the key. What do I mean by that? If you have a successful legal empowerment program, how do you know that you are successful? What changes at the end? What results do you measure? And I will argue that you might get changes in the law, legal reform, but unless you have changes in the power relations between those who have and those who do not have, unless people, power here means having greater control over your own life. If people do not end up with greater control over their own lives through the use of the law, then legal empowerment has not occurred. And so the criteria we use, the way we design our programs, and the way we deliver it will have legal reform as a component of the scheme. But it has to go beyond that to include voice, mobilization, identity, awareness building. All of those become preconditions for legal empowerment of the poor. In my class, I used to have this debate with my students. So who must take the lead in a legal empowerment process? And after a while, they come up with all kinds of things like lawyers and that. And at the end of the day, then we conclude that it is the poor themselves, but supported by all of these partners. And that is because the other thing I've come to realize is empowerment is really a nonsense word. It makes no sense in the context of, in which it is a transitive word, to empower. If that means that people who have power will willingly give power to those who do not have, very naive. It's never happened in the history of human civilization. In the old days, 200-300 years ago, there used to be wars. There's only violent revolution that changed power relations. And then more recently, we have had non-violent change of power relations. Gandhi and Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela and so on and so on. And now we have social movements and we have social media and so on, through which power relations can change. The key point here is that people have to want to take power. And it's not empowerment that we are really talking about, but self-empowerment. It's no point pushing people to change unless they want to change. But sometimes They don't even know that they can change, and we need to engage. The example I can give you is from South Africa. I was working in the poor provinces of South Africa in 1994, when Nelson Mandela was about to be released from prison. And we reflected on what will happen when the blacks took power in South Africa. So apartheid was going to vanish. The ANC was going to win the elections, obviously, far large majority. But what would happen to poor black people? That was the question we asked ourselves. It became clear that the poor blacks who were driven off their ancestral lands and were now living in what was called homelands, where the whites had driven them off the marginal lands where they made their homes. They were given a kind of a little pension, a subvention. That's how they made their living. They were not working, they did not have jobs, they had lost agency, the capacity to look after their own self. So when the blacks would win power, it became clear to us working on the ground that they would not be ready to take power in the sense of taking control over their own lives, in the sense of having the skills to earn an income. How do they begin to look after themselves? And the ANC will obviously take away that pension, and they will become poorer. So we have conversations with the policymakers and so on. For the first 10 years of the ANC rule, the poor blacks in South Africa all became poorer. They did make some changes, like in the social welfare ministry, they made it the social development welfare ministry to make that shift. But that's the kind of challenge we will face, especially with people who have lived in poverty generation after generation. Will they be ready to want to take control over their own lives? So we have a lot of work to do. You have heard already of the 4 pillars of the legal empowerment process. Let me just mention that they are access to justice and the rule of law, property rights, labor rights, and what we call business rights. For poor people to have certain rights that allow them to grow their micro businesses. Now, business rights is not the normal kind of right that Professor Sudarshan mentioned, but the former Henry Robbins was a member of the commission as well. And we checked with Mary and we said we're going to introduce into this commission's report the concept of business rights. And it would mean legal mechanisms to empower micro businesses in the informal sector. And she said we should make it clear that it is not part of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and justify the case we are making. And that's why it is there. Those are the 4 pillars. The only point I will make on those 4 pillars is that they have to work together. It is tempting to say property rights is enough, I can't do the others. Labor rights is enough, I can't do the others. Why do we have to make them work together? Because it has to be anchored in the livelihoods of the poor. And livelihoods of the poor, as you know, they have jobs. Or no, they don't have jobs. They do jobs. They're not sure if that job will be there tomorrow. The jobs are typically temporary, so they do jobs. But they don't make a living as we do from a single job where we get a good salary and we can make ends meet. They have to do jobs, they have to have a little business, selling some cakes or some clothing or some ornaments or something. Then they also have to depend on a little land that they might own some assets. So it's jobs, it's business, it's ownership of assets or property rights, and it's access to basic services. All of those things combine to make their livelihood. If you're going to empower them legally, you have to address all of those. That is why it has to be systemic in nature. It's not just an academic idea. It is based on the reality of the livelihoods of the poor. So let me just, having said that, close this little opening address. Having reflected on all of that, and having become quite disappointed in what the formal system has done so far, I am really excited to be now establishing or helping to usher in this center. And I should share with you my dream for this center, which is that it becomes a national movement on legal empowerment of the poor. It becomes this national movement through a network of grassroots activities, interacting with civil society organizations, with the legal fraternity, which is critical, and with academic institutions. I would like to see this go way beyond our university and us engaging with several others, whoever might be interested, so that we end up setting a kind of a mosaic, a framework, a process, and a movement that will go forward. Without that, little projects on legal empowerment of the poor, I'm afraid, will not deliver. This is about wholesale systemic change. We will have at the same time, and that's why I'm happy that our School of Government and Public Policy is engaged. We have to engage the law. We have to engage policymakers. If the policymakers are not buying in, the space for legal empowerment of the poor will never be opened up. And that's my vision, that's my dream. And so I was really happy when Kavya and Abhirani and Pratik, who is working on his PhD on this subject, all expressed their interest. Several other students are here. It is you who will have to take this and lead it. And at the end of this, we will have a little conversation so we can share your ideas. One of our PhD students, Majahat, has already indicated to me that he wants to take a leadership in several of the villages around where he is from. So that's the kind of thinking and energy that I hope this will all generate. So with those viewers, thank you for coming and for sharing your thoughts. Okay. My colleagues, Ajay, who is really a real energetic force with all of this, and he has a good hairstyle as well.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. I'm so glad that you've laid out the vision for this center, and I hope that we'll reach there soon. And with that, I would like to invite Professor Ajay Panday, to Professor at Jindal Global Law School and co-director of the Center for Legal Empowerment of the Poor, to introduce the center, its goals and work plans.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's not good afternoon. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I think this idea, national movement to network of classes, great idea. And I share my own thoughts on the subject of legal. I have always been thinking that education has a great role to play, and education can instill some of the ideas as to why the common people, ordinary people, need to have equal access to justice and equal protection of the laws. It is not really, that's how I think, it's not really in the interest of those people themselves, but it is in the interest of all of us, especially those who think about law, those who are associated with law in whatever way they have their association. And I think everyone is associated with law, because law is a creation that is every one of us, it belongs to us. We created laws and we create them. We make and unmake laws. Therefore, it is for each one of us to reflect as to what our creation is doing, whether that creation is inclusive of masses or it is exclusive of them, in a way that masses are actually intimidated by law, its processes, its mechanisms, its structures, etc. And their language, language of all of this, the language of law, the language of the structures and mechanisms and processes of law, all of that. And this is something that I have been personally experiencing for almost 3 decades in my several ways of association with law. Different forms, from being a legal editor, to a lawyer, to an activist, to a community mobilizer, also being a teacher. And I am confronted with this question if someone approaches me in Delhi, I'm talking about Delhi, I'm not talking about the rest of the country. And if they have enough means and they also are informed citizens, they are educated people, if their quest is to get credible legal aid in Delhi, I would say that I will vote for that they will get credible legal aid. I narrate this very recent example. I was in a TV show along with 2 Supreme Court lawyers and a former DGP, Director General of Police of Uttar Pradesh. And there were few victims of this mafia, Big Ahmed. They were also in this movie. And I tell you, they are suffering. That their ordeal is still going on. And none of us actually have any clue as to what advice or what legal aid and what is the recourse. The lawyers are saying it was going to take 30 years and it's a long battle to be prepared for all of that. The police personnel doesn't have any clue. So I have always experienced this, that law and its processes, its mechanisms, its language, etc., and its promises, the complete disconnect between what is promised and what is at the grassroots that we see through the experience. The complete disconnect. Now I started working on addressing this disconnect, and then I realized that it's not just that disconnect. Actually, what taking this key from George Bernard Shaw, that all professions are conspiracies. All professions are conspiracies against the laity. That's how I started thinking that it's nothing but it's a conspiracy against common people. Right? Now we don't want, as educators and as people who initiate these movements in civil society and communities, etc. We don't want to be seen as conspirators. We don't want to be saying or talking about the most fundamental provision of law for that matter in India, in the Indian context, which is the guarantee of a dignified human life to everyone. It's the most fundamental one. And when I talk about this provision, my feet actually tremble because I know what I'm talking about is some kind of fiction. It's not a provision of law, it doesn't exist. And now this, we also need to really understand that this is not just a provision of law that got written in the Constitution of India. It is actually our promise. It's my promise to you, your promise to me. It's what we the people of India, we the people everywhere else, promise to be the people. So it's my promise and it's your promise, it's everyone's promise to ensure that everyone leads a dignified life. So when we undertake a work like this is in our own interest. Because if we are not doing it, we are not serving the purpose of law. And law will certainly fail, and it is failing because it is devoid of masses. And if it remains devoid of masses, it can never succeed. So for the success of law, in finding meaning in what we are doing, I think this is very important that we have a certain goal. I'm for that I'm extremely happy that we are launching this center into innovation and schemes and those it's not possible without inspiration. So I'm very thankful because I am someone who is exploring and experimenting with ways as to how to address this disconnect and to a certain extent some of the aspects that I talk about conspiracy against women. And so I see this entire endeavor from that standpoint. And when I think of making it a national movement to network of classes, I think that's a wonderful idea that would require a lot of participation from the communities, and that's really important. It's really critical. You have mentioned the term empowerment, and I am also really not like that term in a different context. Because whenever I thought our students work with communities, I also engage with communities, and I often feel that we don't have that kind of power. We know that this is something that needs to be done, but we don't have that kind of power, right? And therefore, to say that this is something to empower them, I always question that. And I feel that power is already there with people. The only thing that educational institutions and our endeavors should do is to create a process by which that power can be realized by these people. And this is exactly what I did in my grassroots work. I engaged with people and I tried to secure their participation with that idea in their mind that all the power is with you and we come to you actually to seek your support. We don't go to you or we don't come to you to actually help you or to do some favor to you, but to seek your support in rescuing us, actually, because this is what the scenario is. So I'm certainly not going to take a lot of time talking about this, but there are certain ideas. One idea is to map the work in India, whether similar academic institutions which may be doing this kind of work. So that work is happening. What is it that we've done around the country? So we did write a proposal for a small grant to do this kind of work. The idea is that we move around India, organizing a couple of regional consultations, 4 or 5 regional consultations with academic institutions and some other stakeholders like NGOs and some other partners like legal services authorities, etc. And find out what is the status of things and how we can support and promote some of the ongoing initiatives and orient them. So this would also require a lot of leadership role. So the vision is great, it requires a lot of efforts and very focused approach. I've had a discussion with several people in India, outside India, about the center. I myself have not been using the term poor, I'm using in a different way. I say poverty-stricken people, not really poor people. It's a reflection on us that we did not do what we were supposed to do to ensure that there is equitable distribution of resources, and because it's not there, and therefore these people are poverty-stricken. Darkness within corners, poverty-stricken people, right there in our vicinity, we will find. Right here, we have a global center of excellence, a global university. Right in our vicinity, we find both of them. Whereas education, the very purpose of education is life and liberation, right? And legal education would obviously include justice, and justice is included in every education. So, mapping is one, and the other is finding in our own neighborhood as to what are the status of people and what are the different needs. And the work and the effort that we make may also become part of our teaching and research. So these are some of the initial thoughts, and when we have a larger discussion, probably we will get down to what all can be done. Should be good. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I invite Ms. Ujala Chaudhary, Executive Director of Navjyoti India Foundation, New Delhi, to share some thoughts on this.
For us, and first of all, it indeed is an honor, and I think we as an organization, we're very fortunate that we're the first NGO to have collaborated with this such a wonderful initiative. What it does to us, I think, on a larger scale, is it helps us tackle the root causes of exclusion, vulnerabilities, and poverty. I was listening to you, sir, Naresh, and you so beautifully mentioned, you said that the vulnerable communities who we cater to, at times they don't even know that they can change unless they are told or unless they are engaged. You're absolutely right. It was in the year 2008 when I decided to quit my corporate world, and I was working in one of the most rigid areas in Sona block in Haryana. There were two very important lessons which I learned. The first, which our founder member, Dr. Kiran Bedi, told me that Ujala, be very mindful and careful and cautious that you can't work in isolation or silence. And so true. I think this is exactly what it does. Secondly, I learned a very important lesson from Sir. I think happened to meet you about 13, 12 years ago. And it was then when I got to learn from him, I remember how Sir got the students from the university to our center. And he said, Ujala, whatever the students are learning, and what I see in the community, there is a huge gap. And I asked him, what can we do? He says, why don't I bring the students? We're already working in some 45 villages in Haryana in Sona block. And we're working with close to 2,000 to 3,000 women of the villages. And he says, why don't I bring them and let's see what we can do? I said, okay, let's experiment. So the students, they're already learning, I think, RTIs, they knew everything about it. But the gap was in our community or the women, they were facing so many problems at grassroots level, but they did not know how to go about it. So I think that acted as a beautiful partnership ever since then. And I don't know, sir, if you know this or not, but the kind of impact which it had, our women, because there was already a federation which they had made, the SSG Women, Self-Help Group Women. The name of the federation is Jagrit Nari Federation, which is empowered women. It has a proper model wherein there is a president, vice president, treasurer, and other board members. And once they were told how to file RTI by the students, would you believe that the roads which were not constructed for 20 years, they fought for it and it was all constructed. That's the power, I think, of this tool and the So what it did, I think, what I've closely witnessed in the community is that it is just that they need to be heard. They need to be, there is no dearth of policies in our country, we all know that. But they do not know how to use their powers. They do not know how to go about it. But these are real-time examples which I have witnessed. And I think I have a duty that I must share this with you all. That is one example. The roads were constructed. They, again, I'm not going to say that they have to help themselves. It's all about self-reliance. So I understand because I've witnessed it so closely. Second important, I think another example which I can think now is that the women especially were really, they were really upset because right in front of some government schools, the boys' government schools, there were illegal liquor shops. And you remember how they were troubled and they were beaten up by the young boys. There were so many illegal liquor shops in the communities where we were. And it was the federation who all came together. They went to the administration, they went to the DC office, and it was shut down by them. That is the power of legal awareness and them coming together. So that is what I think this will do. We have seen this, the kind of outcomes, the results, which we've seen so closely. And I'm sure this is an amazing initiative. I know, sir, that the vision has been ever since we met first, at the rural campus in Sona Block. And I'm extremely happy on behalf of the organization. I think couldn't have asked for more. Because we know the kind of impact it had in the past and it will have in the future. Especially because when you empower, I know you said you really like the word empower, but when you try to create awareness amongst the community, it leads towards sustainability, it leads towards self-reliance and hence the growth. And who better than them as brand ambassadors who were once, they were drowning themselves and they had come. It's beautiful to see how far they have come. The women today, they are not only, they're fought, but they're also fighting for others' rights today. Because they were saved at some point of time from drowning themselves. So it creates a ripple effect in the community once you create that kind of awareness. I can take another example is being in this sector, there are women sarpanch. Also, we've seen that how once you empower not only women but other sarpanches. But I must share this example in the village Damdama, again in Sona Block. There's a lake, Damdama Lake. And once we created awareness on rural governance and the schemes which exist, the women sarpanch, we told her this is your right and there are funds available. So we as an organization are not going to approach any corporate and seek funds because the funds are already lying there. You just have to go, make efforts, approach the government and fight for it. And we believe she went all the way to Chandigarh and got 25 lakhs sanctioned to buy that lake. So this is all possible. We've seen this happen, and which is why we're extremely happy that this is a formal way that this is now structured, and there is no second thought about it. That this will really go far. And I'm totally convinced that we really cannot work in silos. So when you see this as a national movement, definitely a lot of institutes and like-minded people will have to come together definitely to make this indeed a national movement. you have a chance to come to Bhavana, which is a settlement area. I'm sure you got also a chance to interact with our students who are young students from slum and the resettlement areas. Now, we run a very interesting model which is called Bal Gurukul. They are young students who are aged, let's say, 10, 12 to 16. And they are the harbingers of change today.
They're school dropouts.
They are school dropouts, that's right. They are school dropouts. And few of them are even disabled, physically disabled. You know, people ask me that what is it that they get that they are running classes or creating awareness on the rights, etc., to others? Because you know, the area where we are in Delhi, in Bhavana, it has about close to 18,000 students below the age of 18. Now, as an organization, the kind of bandwidth and resources we have, we cannot cater to students beyond 2,000. So then what happens to the rest of them? Now that was the time when the concept of Bal Gurukul was introduced. Because they say that idle mind is devil's workshop. And that's a crime-prone area, by the way. And you know, when we interact with the schools and principals and administration, they come back and say that, you know, the students as young as 12, 13, 14 years of age, both boys and girls, they are getting into drugs, addiction, and all sorts of heinous crimes which exist. So what we do is, we have introduced this concept, as I said, Bal Gurukul. These kids in the morning, they go to government schools. Because, so that they do not drop out, we bring them back to our centers, which is a legal education center, post which whatever they learn and whatever little time they have in hand, they make sure that they go back to all the students wherein we have not been able to reach out. With no means whatsoever. And we must come and see that, you know, they don't have resources. So what do? How do they teach? Where do they teach? Where do they create awareness what they learn from us? You know, they have some small tiny homes and the doors or the walls are made blackboards. The teaching learning material is from the waste material wherever they find. As I said, a lot of people ask, what do they get? It's all about awareness. It's all about the way, you know, we as an organization also kind of communicate with them that you've been fortunate that you got a chance to learn. Now give it back. Now, learning is not only academic learning, it's also legal awareness. Because they are the ones who are suffering the most at that level. So whatever we tell them, whatever we teach them, whatever the institutes or the organizations or even universities like that of yours teach, it doesn't stop there. Even if you teach us, rest assured, it goes back to the students, then to the parents, then again to the students that we have not been able to cater to, and the community at large. So ripple effect in true sense. So on that note, I would like to thank all of you once again. And I know for sure that next time whenever we have a chance to interact, I'll come back with more stories so that you know you can be even happy that you know the kind of impact which it really has at the grassroots level. And eventually it not only changes their lives, their family lives, but people get touched. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I'm sure all of us are looking forward to being a part of such stories as well. That is the goal of this center. So yeah, so now we have an open session for suggestions, observations, questions by all those who are present here.
Hello everyone, I'm Sudeep. I'm a faculty at Jindal School of Government and Public Policy and also a founding member of Complexity Economics, Applied Spirituality and Public Policy Center, where Raja Singh is the director. So My own background is interdisciplinary. I come from physics background and then get into mathematical modeling, etc. So I mainly work in the areas of what is known as quantum-like modeling. It's a kind of interface between quantum science and decision science and applied to social sciences, and also complex adaptive systems. So I'm really feeling very excited because this is completely new area to me, but this is so much to learn. I mean, I think that is a kind of like gold mine if I really get into that. And I see that, I was discussing with Professor Singh for quite some time because he has this very brilliant idea of how to make power positive someday. And that is something which is directly challenging the standard way of understanding empowerment and standard way of understanding games, but from my perspective, as a kind of like, you can say applied mathematician, we like to use that word, we have to also think about new perspectives. And as say, for example, Professor Sudarshan was starting with this wonderful concept of say Indian jurisprudence. So these kind of ideas need to be brought in and to really start thinking a different way. Because until and unless we have new frameworks, we are stuck. We are going back to the same kind of, and that is exactly the idea of making power a positive subject. So I was thinking in two directions. One is definitely a complexity science perspective, because you see that all that we are discussing now, these are all about like kind of like non-linear relations. Non-linear, so power by definition is asymmetric, and I think that that is also kind of acknowledged by Indian jurisprudence philosophy in a way. So we need to think in terms of non-linearities, in terms of feedbacks. Say as the last example also came from this wonderful learning experience. So that also I was really thinking that how resources can be used so creatively. So as you mentioned that blackboards example, etc. So all of these things are really very much different from what we learn as neoclassical economics perspective. So you just have to solve a kind of like a mechanical algorithm and come to utility optimization solution. That is certainly not going to work. So complex adaptive systems view, I would be very keen to learn more that how to use that here. And a particular point, and here I would just like to leave these particular points about uncertainty. I think that a lot has been kind of done in standard economics. And why I bring economics? Because till now policy making is unjustly inspired by economics. So, but there has been a lot of awareness in economics about the risk, which can be roughly called as known unknowns. But what about unknown unknowns? What about radical uncertainty? And I think that power relations based on radical uncertainty is something very, very different. And perhaps if you really try to think of coming up with a framework that how power relations work under radical uncertainty, then perhaps positive sum game can be thought about, or at least different from, I win, you lose, and that kind of thing. So these are my initial thoughts, but it's a great area of learning for me. So I will be very keen to continue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Stephen Marks, the Dean of the School of Public Health and Human Development here, and I have three quick observations to make on this very important occasion to reconnect with Ajay and to see that Naresh and Sudarshan are taking leadership, as are you that are making this something that has real potential. And let me explain my 3 points here. First is that I think because of you, and because of the background that we bring here at this university, across different schools, we are indeed uniquely positioned to play this leadership role in mobilizing resources nationally. And I think that idea of developing regional consultations and so on will take off. But I think starting here, we really have the credibility, 30, 40 years of experience in these areas. Secondly, I think that reflection of the first point is that we're sort of observing here both institutionally and intellectually
sort of Venn diagram with 4 circles emerging here. The concepts that have been raised and the institutional connections fall into, of course, the Commission on Legal Empowerment Report and pillars behind that, and the individuals behind it, and the unique ideas that some of the people brought to it. Secondly, is the sustainable development and sustainability framework. How does that fit? How can that be reinforcing the legal empowerment report? Third is the human development framework. And of course, with Sudarshan here and Naresh and so on, we are in a unique position to show leadership in the core concept that challenged the notion that growth is the end of development rather than human-centered development, based on human beings being the end rather than the means of development. And that is absolutely fundamental, and I think that's the value, regardless of the ups and downs of what UNDP did with the report of the commission. The idea of the human development reports are still fundamental, and in fact, it is for that reason that the school that I direct is called School of Public Health and Human Development, which is that conceptualization of human development. And the fourth circle in this Venn diagram is, of course, the human rights framework, where we have active rights development with Ajay and Gupta and the work that we've done, but also the human rights framework that brings that provides tools and mechanisms, philosophical and legal and institutional, to address the issue of the concepts of accountability, rule of law, and so on, fundamental to the legal empowerment. So we need those 4 frameworks to be mutually reinforcing, intellectually and institutionally. That brings me to my third and final point, is that you probably guessed that's where I'm headed. It's that the School of Public Health and Human Development, I underscore human development, is keenly interested in contributing whatever we can to making this initiative work, to move it forward. And we do have, we just started with the smallest, newest school, but we do have a dynamic faculty and a wonderful set of students, all of whom have internships to do, all of whom are deeply committed to the human development framework, all of whom talk nonstop about community-based development activities. That's what they want to do. They have 2-month internships to do in the summer. They have 1-month internships to do in the winter, and we're growing. And so the role that we could play in utilizing our faculty, students, teaching, outreach, and so on, we place at their disposal, because this is something that, for reasons that Naresh alluded to, I've been deeply committed to, having been very close to June throughout the duration of the function of the. So I offer the School of Public Health and Human Development as an ally partner that every user can work with us in movements ahead. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sudarshan. I am a research scholar in CSR and public policy, and I am working on the policy revision part. I would like to start my discussion with the professor said that we should start we should think about the implementation of this program from the 2 ways. One should be the top down, and the second one is the bottom. The top down should be related to the providing internship to the college students who is needing to the internship. First of all, we should provide their training, and they will go to the villages and provide training to the another one. So from this model, we can create the from top down to we should start to bottom of the student. And there should be one another direction to the center, that is policy schemes, because we know that if poor people don't know how to use the scheme that government has provided. They don't know how to make the ration card, how to correct the naming the ration card. If there is a scheme related to MSME, how to get the loan from the banks. which is government is providing. So we should also provide training related to that also. We can collaborate with the banking and finance school, which is very expert into the finances and all. And I would like to share one of my experience. I'm a RTI actualist from the 2016 at the age of 17 years, and I filled many RTIs. Total number of RTIs is 100 plus till now. And one case was my mother was very ill, and I come from a very poor background. My father died in 2016, so there was no money to treatment of the my mother. There is a scheme of Ayushman Bharat scheme, and in which government is providing me about 5 lakh rupees for the insurance part. So I filled an article why we are not in that scheme. We are not a beneficiary. So the loophole in the scheme was that they were considering only people who are the poor according to the census 2011. Then I fought against it, and then government changes is if anyone is having the BPL card, they can make the Ayushman Bharat card. So if we empower the people like this way, they can get the desired results. Another thing is that to implement this, we can do the pilot study with the map. Okay, we can choose one tehsil, and then as Professor Panday said, okay, we will map what is the need, and we will do the need assessment. Because if we are giving what is not required, it won't be any beneficial. First of all, we should do the need, what is the maximum need that we should do. So we should do the as with the help of MEMS NGO, pilot study and mapping and the needs.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ajay, and I'm a third year Alumni student at Jindal Global Law School. First of all, thank you so much for organizing this conference. It's been an honor to be a part of this conference and witness all of your opinions. Now, I would like to share an experience from my latest internship during the month of January. So I'm a law student, so I was dealing with bail matters, and I was asked to prepare a bail application for a 17-year-old kid who was charged with murder. And because I was preparing the bail application, I went to the juvenile judge. My senior asked me to handle this case by myself. I handled the situation. I went to the juvenile justice court. He was in jail. And because of my bail application, he got bail. And I met the 17-year-old kid, and he was in class 11. And I realized the gap that we have. As in, what I realized within myself is we are learning a lot in school, but how are we applying and how are we spreading it if the people who are actually witnessing the disturbances of the society, if they're not getting access to such study or legal awareness and marketing. So then after this, I was just thinking about it, and on 18th of April, we got this brochure, this introduction of the center, and I was so excited to be a part of it. I was just waiting to be a part of this conference. And then what I felt after listening to all, first of all, the goals were so interesting, and I personally felt personally attached to such goals. For instance, Professor Ajay's idea of mapping the work in India. So I personally think that because of the leadership goals and how I could spread awareness, my own legal knowledge. So I'm really excited to be a part of this center. And thank you so much for this conference. Thank you.
So much. Yes, yes.
Now, I've been thinking about
I think we like
yeah,
this.
that's wrong. Yeah, about Naresh's point on making power positive something. It might be useful to correct some examples. I mean, at one level, We don't know how, I mean, there's the great novel by John Steinbeck, The Grapes of Wrath. Now, this is about big, the big banks, you know, and what they do. This, the land of this peasant is being taken away and he's attacking the bulldozer driver. And that guy says, I don't know, I mean, I got orders to demolish your shack. I'm not responsible. I mean, don't do this. And then he says, who should I, who's responsible? Some bank somewhere is responsible. We don't know. So that's one, right? So there, it's a bit difficult to think about how we might. But in the course of one of the things that I was reminded about at forgotten is that I was working with an NGO in Tamil Nadu. It refers to your picking up a point about Indian jurisprudence. This was about, it was about cultural relations. This NGO was about practices that the community has, which are culturally grounded, which are good. Now the problem in Tamil Nadu was that it's a very segmented caste society. The land was owned by upper caste people, and the tilling of the land was done by the Dalits called Barayas and Pratik. It's also an English word now. But then what had happened was that after the changes, political changes, democracy, right? The dominance of the Mirastars owning the land diminished politically, and others came into political power. So once these people felt that they had come to political power, the job of the Parayan was unpaid, but conventional, traditional, was to clear channels through which rainwater will fill irrigation tanks. ALEs they are called in Tamil. Tank irrigation is the basis for much of the agriculture in that part of the world, except the Kavya, where the water is in the river. So they're all dried up. Right? And because these people said it's demeaning for us now to do this unpaid work that our forefathers were doing for the Mirastars. The Mirastars felt that it's demeaning for them to get down on the ground and use a shovel and dig the earth to create a rainwater channel. And the consequence was there was no water. So if you could bring them together, this is what actually happened. I said, listen, everyone is suffering because of this, right? I mean, you've got no water, you're unable to grow anything in your land, and these people are quite right. Why should they be? Because their forefathers did free labor for you, continue to do free labor now. So that led to a thing where everybody chipped in, regardless of what caste, when they kind of became aware of how they are, hurting themselves a lot. So you see, and therefore, not only did it bring down the caste barriers, but it also replenished the tank, and there was a revival of agriculture, and incomes in the families went up. All many good things happened. So I think we need to figure out ways, and the thing is that what is important here, and where the law comes in, is that we were able to call this a kind of a water users association and register it, right? So they became equal members of a legally registered body, upper caste, lower caste, everybody, and therefore they were operating under this auspices of this. So they could have a bank account, they could get supplies, they could get equipment, rent equipment, pay for it. All of this was possible. So the law in that way, the right to association is a fundamental right. And we need to try and encourage more and more people to form more and more associations for different purposes and advance a collective cause. So I just thought.
Yeah, so just one suggestion, and I think while Sir was saying that English, and that's what we learned from Dr. Devi while she was in the military. I think we must from day once start documenting these stories. Because if we want this to become a national movement, at times we kind of keep doing and doing kind of small little things which really has a huge impact in the community or in the lives of the community. So what will happen is once we start documenting even these small stories or whatever impact it has on the community, it will move faster because other organizations or NGOs, they will start to replicate these models faster. The good practices, the sir is saying and the kind of stuff which I'm saying, you will not even know, sir, that 13, 12 years ago, that small little interaction with the community, the kind of impact and the way it's changed their lives. So what happens is that tomorrow, when other NGOs or the students, they kind of need all that, replicate it faster.
And it need not be written, it could be video.
It could be videos, it may not be written, whatever form we may choose.
Very good. Anything else?
And I'm also reminded of the idea of human rights cities actually, which Kathleen has been promoting. And the first time I actually came to know this idea was from her, because she was visiting the path along the scale of 9. And when I was saying this to myself, that why not we make efforts to create Mewat as a good governed district, and it may also be called a human rights district or whatever, maybe a good governed district. Now, of late, in this G20 conference, Centers Conference, the Mohan Kumar referred to a university working in a district and making it some kind of model district. So we can also think along those lines. So how to engage with, and what we had done in Yuva, we started with 35 volunteers, community volunteers, and I was very sure that that must have been. So we in the first year of this program we had 35 members from 6 villages, and there were 9 women. And all of these we brought women great difficulty. I was completely told that no, it's a complete no. You can't have women participate in public spaces. The program is not going to succeed. And I was equally firm. I said that if women are not going to participate, I'm not going to carry out this program. So 9 women came, and then eventually there came a time when this group was of 5,000 plus people. 5,000 plus volunteers just in a small district of 400 odd villages, and out of those 5,000 volunteers, there were more than 2,500 women. So we crossed that line of having 50% women in the group. So that, and then it was all supported by community radio. And in a university, we have also been thinking of a community radio. I've been in touch with the dean of journalism and communication. So we will have a community radio eventually, and that is a good reach in about 50 odd villages. So if we can create a cluster like that where students and there are a lot of interns and all of that, so they can all engage in communities. And I think that is what education must do, because everything else is there. What we impart in classroom, the information that is many more times available through these apps and all those things. So this is what we really need to focus on, that how they deal with these issues of the communities. And until when we would actually continue to have this problem of inequality and different ways of inequality. Those things that bother. So I think we need to find a way. And it may be a good idea to involve our interns in working with communities in such a way that at least on some parameters, the cluster becomes a good governed cluster. So for instance, midday meal program or right to health or some of these areas with the participation of community. And that is actually that is a big area where we can see the change from just legal literacy
to legal empowerment. It's not our chief justices have also been talking in those lines that we have to make the shift from just legal literacy to legal empowerment of communities. So I just,
Ajay, what you say is that we need to, in preparing the curricular syllabus, we kind of now pay lip service to experiential learning. You know, we put the Ajay started the clinic here, so others will say, oh, we'll send out our students to go do some interviews in the surrounding villages and, you know, we call the course some qualitative assessment and so on. So this is lip service. We need to radically change the proportions. Far too much time is asked of students to sit in classrooms and, you know, listen to, you know, sages on the stage pontification. It's more learning is possible. So one of the things we need to do as a university across the board, and this is also, I mean, justified on the grounds that the national education policy lays an emphasis on that kind of experiential learning. And also we are supposed to be an institute of eminence. In other words, we don't strictly have to follow the UGC recommendations on what proportion or how many credits you give for this or that. We can create a credit structure. And the important thing though is that we need to persuade the senior management in the university to have a decent budget that enables, you know, students during semester to travel, not just, you know, one day trip to Jagdishpur village, which poor villagers, I don't know what they think of us, besieged, right? And we need to have a place where we can go a little further out and maybe stay overnight. We could think of, say, if they would rent somewhere else, they could stay, you know, in the Kurukshetra University student housing, something like this. We need to plan this. So I think one of the initiatives the center could take is in terms of what can we do within the university ourselves in terms of enabling our students. See, we have grand ideas. I mean, Vishwanathan is known for having contributed this idea of cognitive justice. Now, Professor Sani may argue that he's using the wrong term, cognition. It's more epistemology, knowledge. What he is saying is that we need to value the knowledge that we get by interacting with the community as equal to the knowledge that we get out of journalism, scopus listed or otherwise. And what the professors can say, that all knowledge in a way has, you know, values. So that equity, so that means cultivating in students a sense of humility, right? Not to say I've got degrees from, you know, Harvard or whatever, and therefore I'm superior, or Jindal I'm superior. To say, your knowledge is partial, minimal. There's much more to be learned. So it's a kind of innate sense of humility that we need to cultivate. Because students going with an attitude that they know and the other doesn't is the wrong attitude. You know, they want to go and, you know, figure out. I mean, yes, if a community that is impoverished or, you know, as you say, poverty stricken, could help itself, it would have helped itself. It needs some help. We need to identify what help it needs so that it can then go on to help itself. And can our student body working under the auspices of such a center do that? How are we to train them to do that? You know, so I think it'd be useful because sometimes you can be off-putting, right? I mean, if students are not given prior training as to how you communicate, how you interact, you know, it comes down to things like how you dress. I mean, you know, for the villages around here, our university is like a zoo. Animals they live upon as, you know, some exotic creatures that have been, you know, and for the most part it's like a prison group. so enclosed, gate pass, entry pass, all that, so these animals here are trapped. So we need some liberation inwards and learning outwards.
And also, I will just, if I just add to that, what Sudarshan was mentioning, the best way to change our own curricula is experiential learning. That cannot be anything else. I just give one example, I also teach behavioral economics. So, in behavioral economics, for example, we have this classic game, business dilemma. And you know that there is a standard kind of like a way of understanding business dilemma that rather than cooperating, they end up non-cooperating. And okay, there are kind of ways of solving that problem. It's often called as repeated game. So you follow that, but again, that is all based on axiomatic rationality and self-utility. But if you really look into the real world, I mean, it is nothing like that. There is huge amount of data now which shows that people actually don't play business dilemma game in real scenario. They do cooperate. So this can only be understood by going to them and understanding that, and it is high time that we start changing our own theoretical frameworks. So that I think is only coming through experiential learning.
I'd just like to come back to what you were saying, Ajay, about human rights cities and about community radio. What was it, over a decade ago, I think that Captain and I went to one of the villages we were working in, and it did exemplify the principles of the human rights cities in which the community is empowered to utilize the human rights framework, in your case, right to health at the local level, to address the institutions, map out the power relationships and how it's central, the whole thing. But the community developing the tools to map out the power relations that are preventing them from realizing their rights and so on. And I think that's a very important lesson, and I think that can be continued. It reminds me also of another set of experiences that may be relevant, which I've acquired by being on the board of Cultural Survival, global indigenous rights organization that has an extremely influential program of community radio. One of the major activities of cultural survival is to empower local communities to communicate in their own languages with their own people. And it has an enormous impact and difference. In fact, tonight, there's a meeting at Pacific time, so middle of the night tonight, I'll be attending the board meeting for that. But it reminds me also of events that I've attended on behalf of this university in Bodoland and in Nagaland, in which we have kind of an ongoing unmet agenda of what we can do to contribute to the empowerment of local communities and tribal communities and so on. And it happens to be one of the priorities set by the students in the School of Public Health and Human Development, is that they really want to be working in tribal areas. And this community radio experience with CS, with Cultural Survival, might be a way we could find mutually reinforcing experiences. And hope that can move forward. Or, by the way, that is taking place at the same time, as you know, that the Forum on Indigenous Peoples is meeting now in New York. And these things are on the agenda on cultural survival.
Thank you so much. Now I request Professor Pratik Phadkule to give the concluding remarks for this conference.
So thank you, Kavya, and in my concluding remarks, I will keep it short, but still I want to say a few things. So I have 2 points to make. Firstly, I would say that it may sound like this legal empowerment, the word itself, or the phrase itself, will look like vague, because while in the field, I know that women empowerment is much more talked about, used phrase or term. So women empowerment may not sound familiar to many of us, maybe. But if you look at the content of legal empowerment framework or legal empowerment agenda, then it will look like less alien or more familiar. Because as Professor Singh talked about the 4 pillars of legal empowerment of the core agenda, I think much work has been done, but in compartments. And now there is need to look at all the 4 pillars in a systems approach together, because we discussed that they all work together in a person's life or 4 persons' life. The second point is that the role of NGOs. So I work with NGOs or non-profit sector before coming to this university or before joining my second degree program. So I know that NGOs play a very important, significant role in service delivery and other some aspects, but there are also some limitations to it. And because of these limitations, I got disillusioned and I was struggling. But nonetheless, I'm sure that, I'm confident and I'm sure that, it has some strengths and we need to utilize on these strengths. So this is another point. And I remember we conducted this faculty development workshop or similar activities where we talked about, collaboration with NGOs, collaboration with think tanks. I think this center and the activities of the center will provide this opportunity to realize that goal, to collaborate with NGOs, think tanks, and work on the strengths of each other. So this is, I think, the points that I would like to make. In the end, I would like to thank the Vice Chancellor. He's not here, but I know that he backs us, and also Registrar who gave us the permission to establish the center. Professor Singh, I should start with because without his encouragement, I think it would have not been possible. And both the co-directors and my professors, thank you very much for giving us, all of us, opportunity to come together, because I think that we have ideas, maybe they have weight, and I was also listening to Ishika, her enthusiasm. For me, it's very, very important. It gives me hope, because not many students have that kind of enthusiasm. So I just wanted to appreciate her. And just to continue on my point that, as students, I consider myself as students. So as students, we have, ideas which are maybe half-baked. We need some leadership, we need some encouragement and direction. So I just wanted to thank both the co-directors for their direction. And then I'll come to all the students, members who are present here. Thank you very much for being present. And also, ma'am, Ujala Chaudhary and her colleagues. I should not left her. Neetu Sharma. We visited Bhavana, Navjyoti India Foundation. We had great experience. So their work is, they don't need our certification, but their work is really, really commendable. We have realized that, and our students are here. So I just wanted to thank you for being present here and supporting us, and all the departments last week. Food department or audio visual, the photography, everyone. Thank you very much. And with this, I think I can conclude officially that this program ends here. If there is nothing.
Just these 2 words that have come from the Vice Chancellor. One is wonderful, and the other is congratulations.